When I first entered the field about 20 years ago, I was exposed to several different theories of psychotherapy. I was exposed to, cognitive theory, behavioral theory, narrative therapy, all the various different, I don't know, dozens and dozens of different psychotherapy theories. And yet one of them really resonated with me, and that was object relations. More specifically, at the time, I was exposed specifically to object relations family therapy. And it's interesting to me because 20 years hence, I still find object relations and psychodynamic theory to be the most compelling theory and the most interesting and the most worth my time, so to speak. Incidentally, all the theories resonate with me: cognitive theory, behavioral theory, the brief therapies, humanistic psychotherapies, all of them resonate with me. But when I think about if I had to choose one, or if I had to count the amount of instances in which I think about any particular theory, psychodynamic would be the one that really sticks out for me. When I was in graduate school, they actually forced us to choose one theory and to stick with it for a bit. It's a common graduate school practice, and I chose object relations theory, and barely understood it. In fact, I would venture to say it probably took me about 15 years to really even halfway grasp what object relations and psychodynamic theory was. And it wasn't really until, I don't know, I was probably almost done with my doctorate years later that I was given ample opportunity to read and write and talk and research and all this kind of stuff. It wasn't really until then that I was like, oh, I think I'm starting to get this. And so I think that's part of the reason why I like it, honestly, is because it's so complex, and it never ceases to confuse me. And whereas other theories I can grasp in a short amount of time, it doesn't mean that those theories are not worthy. In a lot of ways, it's like cognitive therapies are extremely elegant and simple, not in a bad way, but simple and not hard to understand. But there's something very compelling about a theory that defies my attempts to understand it fully. Plus, it has such a rich history. It goes way back. So I've done episodes on psychodynamic theory before. Incidentally, if you want to search all the different episode titles, you can go to psychologyinseattle.com. Recently, I made a list of every single episode that we've ever made. Also, some of the episodes aren't available on your podcast app on your phone because Apple only goes back to, I think, 300 episodes or something. So, and we've done, I don't know, almost 500 or 500 plus. And if you want, all the episodes are available on psychologyinseattle.com. So if you go there, you can get access to even episodes that might not be on your podcasting application. Having said that, they're probably really old episodes and not as good as the newer ones, and the sound quality might not be as great. But anyway, I've done a lot of episodes on psychodynamic theory, and if you want to listen to those episodes, you can go to psychologyinseattle.com and search for the titles of those. Actually, part of the reason why I'm even talking to you just by myself in this episode right now is because years ago, I just on a whim decided to do an episode on psychodynamic formulation, in which I analyzed Gloria from the Gloria tapes, if you're familiar. That was one of the very first, if not the very first episode that I did by myself. And in that episode, I talked about how I felt insecure about doing the podcast by myself, because up until that point, I always had a guest, particularly Umberto, with me. And I had a really great response. People said like, oh no, we really like it when you have guests, and we like it when you do it by yourself. So please do more of these. So you can thank a lot of the direction that the podcast went into in terms of theory and all this kind of stuff on that very first psychodynamic episode. Anyway, today's episode is going to be very long. I have 30 pages of notes, which a rough estimate will translate, I'm guessing, into like 4 hours of me talking. So I've got my water next to me, and it's midday, so I have plenty of hours ahead of me to do this. So this is going to be a long one. Basically, what I decided to do was I pulled all the different documents that I have been writing over the past 10 years regarding psychoanalytic theory, and compiled everything into one document, essentially. So even though I've talked about what I'm about to talk about in other episodes, I've never fully synthesized it in this full manner before. And so that's what I'm going to do today. And God knows how long this is going to take. I'm going to talk about the theory. I'm not going to go into the history that much, because if I did that, it would double the size of this episode. I'm going to talk a lot about defenses, particularly projective identification. I'm going to talk about corrective experiences and my approach to therapy. I'm going to also try to provide a number of examples, because that's really where I think the learning happens, is when you actually apply this to actual human beings. You're like, oh, okay, I get it. So I'm going to do that today. All right. Well, welcome to the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a professor and a therapist. This episode is just for patrons of the podcast. Sorry to you non-patrons out there. If you're listening to this and you're not a patron of the podcast yet, you have to become a patron of this podcast to hear the whole episode. So if you're not a patron, this episode is going to end soon. And so if you want to hear the full episode, go to patreon.com and become a patron. That's patreon.com. When you become a patron, you'll get access to hundreds of patron-exclusive episodes like this one, in which we do deep dives into various different topics. Usually the patron-exclusive episodes are the most meatiest, the most deepiest, diviest. So go to patreon.com, and also remember that a portion of your monthly pledge goes towards various charities that we support. And in fact, we're very close to meeting the next goal on Patreon, in which we'll start donating to petfinder.com, which is an organization that saves pets from being euthanized and connects pets very quickly and through all these different volunteer networks to families that want these animals. So again, go to patreon.com, become a patron, do it now.